The night was cold, and the streets of the city were almost empty. Shadows stretched long under the dim streetlights, and a thin mist rolled between the old buildings. Ethan walked slowly, his hands in his pockets, lost in his own thoughts. Life had been quiet for him, maybe too quiet, and he often wondered why he still stayed in this part of the city. But that night, something unusual caught his eye. Near a corner by the trash bins, he noticed movement. At first, he thought it was just a stray animal looking for food, but as he moved closer, he saw a small figure, too thin, too fragile, trembling in the dark. It was a girl, her skin pale with an otherworldly glow, and her large eyes shimmered faintly. Like distant stars, Ethan froze, realizing immediately that she was not human. The little alien girl crouched low, digging through scraps with shaking hands. Her clothes were torn, barely hanging on her small frame. Her face was smeared with dirt, but her expression was full of desperation. Every move she made was slow, weak, as if she had not eaten for days. Ethan's chest tightened at the sight. He knew the world was harsh toward aliens. People feared them, distrusted them, and in some parts of the city, they were hunted like criminals. Helping one could bring trouble, yet Ethan couldn't just walk away. Something in her trembling form reminded him of lost children he had once seen during war. The memory cut into him, forcing his heart to act. He stepped forward carefully, his footsteps soft on the wet ground. The girl noticed him immediately, her glowing eyes wide with fear. She pulled back, pressing her thin body against the wall, clutching a broken piece of metal as if it could protect her. Her small shoulders shook, and Ethan realized she thought he would hurt her. His voice softened as he spoke. "I'm not going to harm you," he said gently, his hands raised to show he meant no danger. The girl tilted her head, as if trying to understand, but her grip on the sharp metal remained. Ethan slowly took out a small wrapped piece of bread he had bought earlier. He placed it on the ground between them and stepped back. The girl's eyes locked on the food, her body trembling harder now, not from fear, but from hunger. For a long moment, she did not move, her large eyes flickering between Ethan and the bread. Then, with a desperate motion, she crawled forward and grabbed it. She ate so quickly that crumbs fell across her hands in the ground. Ethan watched quietly, feeling both sadness and relief. The sound of her chewing was rough, like someone who had been starving for far too long. When the last piece was gone, she licked her fingers, her face showing both gratitude and shame. She looked up at him, her lips parting as if to say something. But the words were broken, strange, a mix of alien sounds and weak human phrases. "Food. Thank you," she whispered, her voice hoarse like dry leaves. Ethan felt a heavy lump form in his throat. He knelt slightly, lowering himself to her level. Her eyes studied him carefully, like a wild animal unsure if it should trust, but there was a faint glimmer in her gaze, hope, fragile but alive. In that moment, Ethan knew he couldn't leave her here to starve in the cold. The thought of turning away made his chest ache deeply. But before he could speak again, she suddenly stood and stumbled back. Her head turned as if she heard something far away. Without another word, she ran into the shadows, her small figure disappearing between the buildings. Ethan reached out, but she was gone, swallowed by the mist of the city night. He stood there frozen, his heart pounding. The echo of her weak "thank you" still rang in his ears. He didn't know who she was, where she came from, or why she was alone, but he felt it. This was not the last time he would see her. Something told him their paths were tied together now, and though he didn't understand why, he knew this encounter was only the beginning of something far greater. The city remained silent, but Ethan's world had already changed. A starving alien child had entered his life, and with her, a mystery heavy with danger and hope. The night no longer felt ordinary. It felt like the start of a story he could not escape. The next morning, Ethan could not forget the glowing eyes of the little girl. Her weak voice, those trembling hands clutching the bread, haunted his thoughts. He tried to push the memory away, but it stayed with him like a shadow. Everywhere he walked, He half expected to see her crouching in the corner, searching through garbage again. His heart carried a weight, heavier than he could explain. Days passed slowly, and Ethan continued his routine, but something felt different. He had lived alone for years, his life simple and silent, yet now there was a missing piece. The streets looked emptier than before, and his own meals felt tasteless. He began carrying small packets of food in his pocket, hoping, though he didn't admit it, that she might return. And one cold evening she did. She appeared from the shadows like a whisper, her steps uncertain, her glowing eyes brighter in the dark. This time, she didn't hold any sharp metal or try to run. She stood still, watching Ethan from a distance, as if testing whether she was safe. Ethan slowly lowered himself, placing bread and fruit on the ground again, then stepping back. The girl looked at him, then at the food, then back at him again. Something had changed in her gaze. It was not only hunger, but recognition. She remembered him, the man who had fed her when no one else would. With small steps, she walked forward, picked up the food, and began eating. This time, she ate slower, her eyes never leaving his face. Ethan remained silent, letting her eat in peace. When she finished, she held the fruit's peel in her hand. Looking unsure of what to do, she opened her mouth, struggling to form words. Her voice cracked, but the effort was clear. "Good. Food. Thank you," she said in broken human language. Ethan felt something stir inside him, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. He smiled softly. "You're welcome," he answered, speaking slowly so she could understand. The girl tilted her head, repeating his words like she was learning. Come." Her voice was weak, but there was a fragile joy in the attempt. Ethan noticed the way she stayed a little longer now, not running away into the night. Instead, she sat on the ground, hugging her knees, watching him with curious eyes. The silence between them was not heavy. It was strange but comforting. For the first time in years, Ethan felt less alone. He wanted to ask questions. Who are you? Where is your family? Why are you alone here? But he knew she could not answer yet, so he let the moment breathe, offering patience instead of pressure. The bond was forming, delicate and quiet. Over the next few nights, she came back again and again, sometimes hungry, sometimes only watching from a distance. Each time, Ethan would bring food and sit nearby, never forcing her to come closer. Gradually, she began sitting beside him, her small frame leaning against the wall. And though words were few, her eyes spoke volumes. Ethan began noticing details he had missed before. Her skin had faint patterns, glowing faintly like constellations. Her hands were small but graceful, with thin lines of light running along her veins. Her voice carried a strange tone, almost musical, even in broken words. It reminded him that she was not human, yet she was still a child, innocent, vulnerable, and in need of kindness. One evening, when the wind was colder than usual, she shivered violently. Ethan quickly removed his scarf and placed it around her neck. The girl froze, staring at him as if unsure how to respond. Then she pulled the scarf tighter around herself, her glowing eyes softening in gratitude. "Warm," she whispered. "Warm, thank you." That night, Ethan walked home with a different feeling in his chest. This was no longer just an encounter with a stranger. It was becoming something more, a responsibility, a bond, a connection he had not expected. He realized he looked forward to seeing her each evening, and deep inside, he feared what might happen if she stopped coming. Still, questions tormented him. Where was her family? Why was she alone in a dangerous city that despised her kind? What had forced a child to dig through garbage to survive? The mystery pressed against his thoughts, but he did not ask yet. Trust had to grow, step by step, and rushing it might shatter the fragile bridge between them. On the fifth night, she surprised him. After finishing her food, she stood close to him and touched his sleeve lightly. Her voice was quiet, but clear enough to hear. "Safe," she said, pointing to him, then to herself. "Safe." Here, Ethan felt his throat tighten as emotions surged within him. In that single word, he understood. She trusted him, even if just a little. And that trust was more valuable than anything else he had known in years. Ethan looked at her, his voice steady. "Yes, safe here." The girl repeated his words softly, almost like a promise. "Safe. Here." The bond was no longer strange, it was real. Two lonely souls had found each other in the cold, harsh city, one human, one alien child. Both in need of something they had lost. Food had brought them together, but trust had begun to hold them. Neither of them knew it yet, but this was the start of a family. The nights had grown colder, but Ethan no longer walked the streets in silence. He always carried food with him, and his eyes searched the corners for a small glowing figure. Each time the little girl appeared, his heart felt lighter, as if the city was no longer so empty. He had learned to wait patiently, offering kindness without demand, and in return, she gave him something far more valuable: trust. One evening, however, she did not come. Ethan waited longer than usual, standing near the alley where they often met. The mist swirled, the wind howled, but no soft steps or glowing eyes appeared. He told himself she might be hiding or too weak to walk. Still, unease gnawed at him like sharp teeth. The next day passed the same way. No sign of her, no trace of her small shadow. Ethan felt an emptiness heavier than he expected. The thought of her starving somewhere in the cold made his chest ache. And then, on the third night, she returned. She was not alone. From the corner of the alley, Ethan saw her small figure appear, clutching something in her hand, but behind her moved another figure, taller, thinner, and clearly weaker. A woman, her posture bent with exhaustion, her steps unsteady, her body wrapped in torn cloth. Her skin carried the same faint glowing patterns as the child, though dimmer, like fading starlight. Ethan froze as realization struck. This was her mother. The girl's eyes lit up when she saw him, and she rushed forward with small, hurried steps. "Food. Food," she whispered, tugging at her mother's hand, pulling her closer. The woman resisted at first, her wary gaze fixed on Ethan. Her glowing eyes narrowed, filled with suspicion and fear. She looked like a mother who had been running too long, protecting her child from every shadow. Ethan felt the tension in the air. He raised his hand slowly, speaking in the same gentle voice he had used with the girl. "It's all right. I won't hurt you," he said, his tone calm and steady. The mother did not reply, but her eyes flickered to her daughter, who nodded eagerly. The child pointed at him and spoke broken words. "Safe. Safe here." The mother's breath trembled as she studied Ethan, her lips parted, and in a hoarse whisper she spoke, her words broken but clearer than her daughter's. "You fed her," she said, each syllable heavy with effort. Ethan nodded, slowly placing bread and fruit on the ground as he had done before. The girl quickly reached for it, dividing pieces between herself and her mother. For the first time, Ethan saw the mother eat. She was cautious, as though each bite was stolen from danger. But as the food filled her, a small relief softened her sharp expression. Her eyes lingered on Ethan with something new, not trust, but gratitude too heavy to hide. The silence between them was filled with the sound of chewing and the faint hum of the city. When the food was gone, the girl leaned against her mother's side, her eyes drooping with tiredness. The mother pulled her close, wrapping an arm around her protectively. Ethan saw how thin her arms were, how exhaustion bent her frame. They had been suffering far longer than he imagined. He realized they were not just passing through. They had nowhere else to go. He wanted to speak, to ask questions, but words felt too heavy for the moment. Instead, he simply offered the scarf again, holding it out to the mother this time. She hesitated, eyes narrowing as if it might be a trick, but when the girl tugged gently at her arm, she finally took it. Her hands shook as she wrapped it around her daughter first, then herself. Ethan noticed her eyes soften for the first time. They were still sharp with suspicion, but behind them, a mother's relief flickered. The little girl looked up at him, her lips curving into the smallest smile. "Warm," she whispered, echoing the word she had learned before. The mother closed her eyes, whispering something in her alien tongue. A prayer, or perhaps a thank you. That night, Ethan returned home. With more questions than ever. Two refugees, mother and daughter, alone in a city that despised them. What horrors had they faced? How long had they been running? Why had no one else helped them? The mystery weighed on him, but so did a new responsibility. He knew he could no longer look away. The next evening, when he came back with more food, they were already waiting for him. The girl smiled faintly, tugging her mother forward. The woman bowed her head slightly this time, a gesture small but powerful. Ethan understood it as silent gratitude, a fragile step toward trust, and deep inside, he felt his life was beginning to change in ways he never expected. The bond was no longer only between him and the girl. Now her mother had entered the circle, bringing both danger and meaning. Ethan looked at them, two fragile lives surviving in shadows, yet still holding on. He realized he could not let them go. The city was cruel, but within this fragile bond, something stronger was forming. The story between them was no longer chance. It was destiny weaving its threads, pulling them together against the cold world, and Ethan knew, in his heart, this was only the beginning of a far greater struggle. The little girl had returned, and with her, a mother. Now, both of them stood at his door, not of his house, but of his life. The wind that night was sharp, carrying dust and cold through the narrow streets. Ethan stood with the alien mother and daughter in the alley, watching their thin frames shiver beneath torn fabric. The girl leaned against her mother, her small hands clutching the scarf he had given. The mother's eyes darted around, searching the shadows as though danger lurked everywhere. Ethan realized they could not survive like this for much longer. He took a deep breath and spoke gently. "You can come with me," he said. His voice steady though his heart raced. The mother's head snapped toward him, her glowing eyes narrowing in suspicion. She shook her head, stepping back protectively. Pulling her daughter behind her, Ethan raised his hands in peace. "Just for the night. You'll freeze out here." The girl tugged at her mother's hand, whispering in broken words. "Safe." With him, the mother hesitated, her breath visible in the cold air, her body tense with fear. Trust was not easy for her, not after everything she had endured. But her daughter's pleading eyes carried a weight no mother could ignore. Finally, with slow, reluctant steps, she nodded. Ethan led them through the quiet streets. He kept his pace gentle, glancing back often to make sure they followed. The mother's steps were unsteady, but she never let go of her daughter's hand. When they reached his small apartment, he paused, unlocking the door and stepping aside. The mother's eyes scanned every corner before she allowed her daughter to step inside. The warmth of the room was faint, but compared to the freezing streets, it felt like shelter. The girl's glowing eyes widened as she looked around. Curious yet cautious, she touched the table, the chair, as though these simple things were treasures from another world. Her mother, however, remained stiff, standing near the door like a guard. Her gaze never left Ethan, sharp and watchful. Ethan placed bread, fruit, and a small pot of soup on the table. The smell filled the room, and he saw the girl's nose twitch as hunger pulled at her. She looked at her mother, waiting for permission. After a long pause, the mother nodded, and the girl quickly sat, her hands trembling with eagerness. Ethan pushed the bowl gently toward her. The mother finally joined her, sitting carefully, as though even the chair might betray her. She ate slowly, each bite small and cautious. Evin noticed the way she kept glancing at him, as if expecting him to snatch the food away. But with every bite, her suspicion softened just a little. The girl, meanwhile, ate with joy, crumbs scattering as she whispered, "Good, warm, safe." Ethan felt something stir deep inside him, a sense of responsibility he had not known in years. The sound of their eating, the sight of their relief, filled his home with a life it had never known. For so long, silence had been his only companion now. The quiet was broken by soft voices and the faint hum of trust beginning to form. It was fragile, but it was real. Later that night, when the girl yawned, Ethan brought out a blanket and laid it on the couch. The mother immediately pulled her daughter close, wrapping the blanket around them both. They curled together like two lost souls clinging to each other for warmth. Ethan watched silently, his heart tightening at the sight. It felt wrong to let them sleep on the couch, but he knew insisting would only scare them more. He dimmed the lights and sat quietly at the table. From time to time, he heard the mother whisper in her alien tongue, soothing her daughter into sleep. Her voice was soft, filled with a mix of love and exhaustion. Ethan did not understand the words, but he understood the meaning. It was the voice of a mother protecting what little she had left. As the hours passed, Ethan's thoughts grew heavy. He knew the risk he was taking. If anyone discovered he was sheltering aliens, there could be punishment, arrest, or worse. But as he looked at the sleeping child, her small form rising and falling with each breath, he felt no regret. Some things were worth more than safety. The next morning, the mother was already awake. She stood near the window, peeking through the curtains, her posture tense. When Ethan offered her tea, she hesitated before taking the cup. Her fingers brushed his lightly, and for the first time, she did not pull away immediately. There was still suspicion in her eyes, but also a faint spark of trust. The girl woke soon after, smiling sleepily as she tugged at Ethan's sleeve. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice clearer than before. Ethan smiled back, kneeling to her level. "You're welcome." The girl repeated his words softly, almost like a song. "You welcome." Her mother watched the exchange silently, her sharp eyes hiding emotions too deep to show. As the day passed, Ethan saw how different they were in the light. The mother's glowing patterns shimmered faintly across her skin like fading constellations. The girl's patterns were brighter, pulsing softly like the heartbeat of a star. They were beautiful in a way the city would never understand, and Ethan realized they belonged nowhere but here, with him, that night. When the girl curled up again on the couch, her mother sat beside her. She looked at Ethan, her lips parting, as if she wanted to speak. At last, in a low voice, she whispered, "Safe." It was only one word, but it was enough. Ethan nodded, his chest heavy with unspoken promises. Shelter had been given, trust had begun, and though danger still lingered outside those walls, inside, something fragile yet powerful was growing. A bond that could no longer be ignored. A bond that tied a lonely man, a starving child, and her protective mother together. A bond that would change all of their lives forever. Asterisk. The days turned into a fragile rhythm. Ethan would return home each evening with food, and the mother and daughter would already be waiting. The little girl grew stronger, her cheeks no longer hollow, her eyes brighter than before. Her mother still carried the weight of exhaustion, but her movements were less desperate now. It was as if the shelter of four walls had given them both a new chance of life. But the tension never fully disappeared. The mother kept watch at the window whenever Ethan stepped outside, her eyes scanning the streets with practiced fear. At night, Ethan often heard her whispering to her daughter in their alien tongue, the sound soft but urgent. He wondered what story she was telling, warnings, memories, or perhaps prayers to a sky no longer theirs. The secrets they carried hung heavy in the air. One evening, as rain tapped against the windows, Ethan finally asked, "Where are you from?" His voice quiet, careful not to break the fragile trust. The mother froze, her glowing eyes narrowing as though the question was a trap. The girl looked at her mother, then back at Ethan, whispering, "Home." "Far." Her mother pulled her close, shaking her head, unwilling to say more. Ethan didn't press, but the silence told him enough. They were hiding not only from hunger, but from something greater. Refugees did not run without reason, and mothers did not starve unless the past was unbearable. He felt the weight of their untold story pressing against the walls of his home. It was a story begging to be heard, but locked behind fear. Days later, the secret began to unfold by itself. The girl had been drawing on scraps of paper Ethan had given her, shapes of stars, strange cities, towering spires that no human city had ever known, and then one picture caught Ethan's eye, a ship burning in the sky, flames devouring its wings. When he asked gently, the girl whispered one word: war. The mother stiffened at the word, her hand snapping the paper away. Her voice trembled with anger as she scolded her daughter in their tongue. The girl lowered her head, silent but tearful. Ethan raised his hand. "It's all right, I won't tell anyone." But the mother's eyes burned with fear, a fear that spoke louder than words. That night, when the girl had fallen asleep, the mother finally spoke. Her voice was low, heavy, and broken. "We run," she whispered, her human words weak but clear. "Ship destroyed, no home, no food, only hide." Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she looked at her daughter, her hands trembling. Ethan understood then. They were survivors of something far greater than hunger. They had lost their world, their people, their safety, everything. The mother's sharp gaze softened only when she looked at her child. For her daughter, she had endured the unendurable. And now, here in a strange city, she clung to the only thing she had left. Ethan's chest ached with a heavy truth. They were not just strangers hiding in his home. They were refugees of a war he had only heard whispers about. And if the authorities discovered them, it would mean certain capture or worse. Still, as he looked at the little girl curled on the couch, her small hand clutching the scarf he had given, he knew there was no turning back. He could not abandon them. Not now, not ever. The following day, he noticed something else. The mother's glowing patterns dimmed when she was weak, but when her daughter smiled, they brightened faintly. It was as if her very life force was tied to her child's hope. Ethan realized that keeping the girl safe was more than love. It was survival itself for the mother. Her secret was written across her skin, even if her lips refused to speak it. One evening, as the three of them sat quietly, the girl surprised him. She placed a small drawing in his hand, a picture of three figures standing together. One tall, one medium, one small, holding hands beneath a roof. The glowing lines of her alien art shimmered faintly across the paper. "Family," she whispered softly, her voice fragile yet full of hope. The mother froze at the word, her eyes filling with tears. She turned away, hiding her face in the shadows. Ethan's throat tightened as he looked at the drawing. In the child's heart, the secret was no longer fear, it was a wish, a dream of belonging. And in that moment, Ethan realized he was no longer simply helping them survive. He was becoming part of their hidden world. But secrets had a way of attracting danger. The city was restless, whispers spreading of alien sightings. Authorities had begun searching abandoned buildings, and strangers asked too many questions. Ethan knew the truth could not stay hidden forever, and when it came out, it would test everything: their trust, their bond, their very chance at life together. That night, as rain fell hard against the roof, the mother finally spoke again. Her voice cracked as she looked at Ethan with eyes both tired and desperate. "You protect us?" she asked, the words trembling like fragile glass. Ethan did not hesitate. "Yes, I'll protect you," he said firmly. The mother closed her eyes, as if placing her last hope into his hands. The secret was no longer theirs alone. It now belonged to Ethan too, binding him to their struggle. In the quiet of his small home, a vow had been made, not spoken in many words, but sealed in trust and sacrifice. The bond between them was no longer fragile, it was unbreakable. The city had grown restless. News traveled fast in the crowded streets, rumors of aliens hiding among humans, whispers of patrols searching homes, and strangers asking questions in dark corners. Ethan listened quietly whenever he passed the marketplace, his heart sinking as each story reached his ears. An alien mother was spotted near the East District, one man said. "They're dangerous. They'll bring trouble," another muttered. Ethan clenched his fists, knowing the words were poison. Back In his apartment, the atmosphere grew heavier. The mother rarely left the couch except to check the window, her glowing eyes sharp and full of warning. The little girl, once cheerful, now sat silently by Ethan's side, clutching the drawing she had made of their family. Fear hung in the air like a storm ready to break, and Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before danger came knocking. One evening, as they sat in silence, there was a loud thud at the door. The mother froze, pulling her daughter close, her patterns dimming instantly. Ethan's heart pounded as another knock followed. Harder this time. "Open up," a voice called. Cold and sharp, Ethan stood, steadying his breath. Before answering, two men stood outside, dressed in plain clothes, but with the posture of hunters. Their eyes scanned Ethan with suspicion, their gazes sharp like knives. "Neighbors say they've seen strangers near here." One said, his tone almost casual, "You've had company lately?" The other added, leaning slightly to peek inside. Ethan forced a tired smile. "No, just me, I live alone." The men studied him carefully, but Ethan stood firm. Behind him, the mother and daughter hid in the small storage room, holding their breaths. The girl pressed her face into her mother's chest, trembling silently. Ethan blocked the doorway with his body, his hands gripping the frame tightly. Finally, the men muttered something about keeping watch and left, their footsteps fading into the night. When the door closed, Ethan's knees nearly buckled with relief. He turned to find the mother standing in the shadows, her arms around her daughter. Her eyes glowed faintly, not with fear, but with something deeper understanding. He had risked everything for them, and she knew it. In her alien tongue, she whispered softly, words he could not understand, but her trembling voice carried gratitude. The next day, patrols filled the streets. Small groups of men walked with lanterns, peering into alleys, questioning vendors, searching abandoned homes. Ethan avoided the marketplace, buying food only from quiet corners where no one asked questions. Even so, he could feel eyes following him. The city was turning into a cage, and the walls were closing in. At home, the mother grew more restless. She paced near the window, muttering under her breath, her patterns flickering faintly. Ethan watched her carefully. "It'll be all right," he said, though he didn't believe his own words. The girl reached for his hand, her small fingers curling around his. Her glowing eyes looked up at him, and in a soft voice she said, "Safe with you." Those words strengthened him more than any armor could. No matter what danger came, he knew he could not let them down. The bond had grown too strong, too real. They were no longer strangers in his home. They were family in his heart. And family was worth protecting, no matter the cost. That night, footsteps returned outside his door, slower, heavier, deliberate. Ethan held his breath as shadows moved beneath the doorframe. A voice murmured quietly, but the words were unclear. Then silence, long and tense, before the footsteps faded away. The threat was not gone, it was only waiting, watching, choosing its moment. The mother sat with her daughter curled against her, her eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. She looked at Ethan, her expression hard and unyielding. "You protect us," she said again, her broken words sharp with urgency. Ethan met her gaze, his jaw tight. "Yes, always," he replied. The silence that followed felt like a pact, unspoken yet unbreakable. Over the next days, fear became a constant companion. Every creak of the floor, every sound in the hallway, every shadow outside the window made their hearts race. The girl tried to smile, tried to play with her scraps of paper, but even her laughter was quiet, hidden. The mother barely slept, her body tense, always ready to flee. And Ethan carried the weight of their safety like a burning chain across his shoulders. But in that fear, something stronger grew. The little girl would sit close to Ethan, her head resting against his arm. The mother, though still guarded, began to watch him with softer eyes. She saw not just a man hiding them, but a protector who had already chosen them over his own safety. And in the quiet of those long nights, trust deepened into something unshakable. The threat outside was real, growing stronger with each passing day, but inside those walls, a fragile bond became iron. The city could hunt, strangers could knock. Danger could wait at the door, yet Ethan, the alien mother, and the little girl had found something worth more than fear. They had found each other, and together, they would stand against whatever storm was coming. The nights grew longer, and danger pressed closer with every whisper in the city. But inside Ethan's small home, something fragile had transformed into something unbreakable. The little girl no longer looked like a starving shadow from the alley. Her cheeks carried color. Her laughter, though quiet, was brighter, and her small hands no longer trembled with hunger. Her mother, though still thin and weary, stood taller, her eyes sharper, no longer only filled with fear but also with a strange hope. Ethan sat by the table one evening, watching them. The girl was drawing again on scraps of paper, her glowing patterns shimmering faintly as she worked. She hummed softly, a sound almost musical, filling the small room with warmth. The mother sat beside her, repairing the girl's torn clothes with slow, careful stitches. It was such a simple scene, yet to Ethan, it felt like something sacred. He realized then that his life had changed completely. The silence that once haunted him had been replaced by soft voices, gentle laughter, and the quiet comfort of companionship. He was no longer just a man living alone. He was part of something greater, a protector, a guardian, maybe even more. The thought both frightened and comforted him. That night, the girl climbed onto the couch and tugged at Ethan's sleeve. Her glowing eyes looked up at him with innocence and trust. "Dad," she whispered softly, her voice fragile yet clear. Ethan froze, his chest tightening, his throat unable to form words. The mother looked at him, her eyes wide, then lowered her gaze, silent but without protest. The word echoed in his mind like a promise. It was more than a name, it was a bond. The girl had chosen him, not just as a helper, but as family. Ethan swallowed hard, his voice breaking as he whispered back, "Yes, I'm here." The girl smiled, resting her head against his arm, as if the word itself had given her peace. From that moment, Ethan no longer thought of them as guests or refugees. They were his family, fragile yet strong, different yet bound together. And with that realization came a vow unspoken but burning in his heart. No matter what danger the world outside held, he would not let them go. He would stand between them and every shadow, every threat, every fear. But the city did not forget. Patrols grew harsher, and people whispered about rewards for those who reported aliens. Posters appeared on walls, showing crude sketches of glowing-eyed figures. Ethan tore one down with shaking hands, hiding it before the girl could see. He knew the threat was closer than ever. Yet strangely, his fear was not as sharp as before, because now fear had purpose. He was no longer afraid for himself, he was afraid for them. And that fear gave him strength, turning his every step into determination. Love, he realized, was stronger than fear. One evening, when the streets outside echoed with patrol boots, the mother spoke. Her voice was low but steady, her eyes locked on Ethan's. "You save us, you risk," she said slowly, struggling with the words. Her hand rested on her daughter's shoulder, her patterns glowing faintly. "Why?" she asked, a question filled with pain and wonder. Ethan did not hesitate. "Because you deserve to live. Because she deserves to laugh. Because you're not alone anymore," he said firmly. The mother's eyes shimmered with tears, her lips parting as though words had failed her. She bowed her head slightly, a gesture of respect, of gratitude deeper than speech. In that moment, Ethan knew her trust was no longer hesitant. It was complete. The girl crawled into his lap, showing him another drawing. 3 figures again, holding hands, standing under a roof, but this time, their glowing lines formed a circle around them. "Home," she whispered, her voice soft but certain. Ethan's throat tightened as he looked at the picture. "Yes," he said, his voice trembling. "Home." Days turned into weeks, and though the threat outside never vanished, Something unshakable grew inside those walls. They were no longer simply hiding, they were living. They cooked meals together, shared quiet laughter, and filled the silence with warmth instead of fear. The mother began teaching Ethan small words in her tongue, and he taught her simple phrases in his. The girl learned fastest of all, her voice growing clearer, her words brighter with every day. And though danger pressed against the door, they faced it not as strangers, but as family. Ethan no longer saw the girl as just an alien child, nor the mother as a refugee. He saw them as his daughter and her mother, a family bound not by blood, but by love and survival. Together, they had created something the world outside could never destroy. A bond stronger than war, stronger than fear, stronger than hate. The city would continue to whisper. Patrols would continue to hunt, shadows would continue to lurk. But inside that small apartment, light had taken root. A human man, an alien mother, and her child had found each other. And in that union, they had found strength, hope, and belonging. There were no longer broken pieces, they were a new family asterisk.